This is one of the most disturbing cases I've ever come across, and it will stay with you long after you hear it. A young couple, surrounded by wealth and influence, was torn apart by an act of violence that no one saw coming. In the heart of Abuja, Nigeria, a marriage that once appeared strong ended in bloodshed. The crime itself was brutal, but what makes this case even more unsettling is the series of events that led up to that fatal night. It was November 18, 2017. The world kept moving, but for one couple, everything was about to change. A day that started with routine ended in horror. Inside a quiet home, a man lay bleeding, his body marked by deep stab wounds. The woman he once called his wife stood nearby, claiming it was all a terrible accident. But the evidence told a different story. What happened inside that house wasn't just a moment of rage, it was something far more chilling. This is the horrifying case of Mariam Sanda. Before we continue, if you enjoy gripping true crime stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let's uncover the truth. Bilyaminu Bello was the kind of man people gravitated toward. He had an easy charm, the kind that made conversations flow effortlessly, a presence that commanded attention without being overbearing. He carried himself with quiet confidence, not just because of his family's status, but because he had carved his own identity outside of it. Born into one of Nigeria's most politically connected families, Bilyaminu was the son of Haliru Bello, a former national chairman of the People's Democratic Party. Privilege surrounded him from birth, but it never made him arrogant. Those who knew him spoke of his kindness, his sense of humor, and his ability to make people feel at ease. He had the rare gift of balancing ambition with humility. From a young age, Bilyaminu understood the weight of his last name. In a country where political connections could open doors or shut them, he knew expectations followed him everywhere. He never resisted it. Instead, he embraced the responsibility. He was educated in some of the best institutions, where he formed lifelong friendships, many of which were built on genuine connection rather than status. Despite his family's influence, he wasn't content to simply ride on legacy. He had dreams of his own, goals that extended beyond the political sphere his father had dominated. Business, finance, real estate, he explored different avenues, trying to build something substantial on his own terms. Friends often said he was driven but never ruthless, a rare quality in a world where power often overshadowed kindness. But beyond his ambitions, Bilyaminu was a man who loved deeply. He was the kind of person who would go out of his way for those he cared about, even if it meant making sacrifices. He valued loyalty, and in his mind, family was everything. When he met Mariam Sanda, it felt like the perfect match. She came from a similarly influential background, her mother Maimuna Aliyu, a former executive at ASO Savings and Loans. They moved in the same circles, understood the same pressures, and for a while their relationship seemed to be exactly what everyone expected. Two powerful families uniting through love. At first there were no glaring signs of trouble. To the outside world, their life together was enviable. Wealth, status, and a love story that fit neatly into the image of success. Friends admired them, and their wedding was a grand affair, a testament to the power and prestige of their families. But behind the carefully curated image, things were not as they seemed. Bilyaminu, despite his outward confidence, found himself navigating the complexities of a marriage that often felt like a battlefield. The arguments came more frequently than he had anticipated. There were whispers among their friends, hushed conversations about fights that escalated, about nights when one of them stormed out. But in their world, people didn't pry too much. It was easy to dismiss as the normal ups and downs of married life. Still, there were moments that unsettled those closest to him. Some had seen a different side of Mariam, one that surfaced in heated moments, unpredictable and intense. Bilyaminu, ever the peacemaker, always found ways to de-escalate. He was patient, sometimes to a fault. He believed in working through problems, in second chances. When their daughter was born, many thought it would bring stability, that the new chapter would soften whatever tensions existed, and for a while it seemed to. Bilyaminu was a devoted father, doting on his little girl with the kind of love that was pure and unwavering. He wanted to give her the best of everything, just as he had been given. But even the strongest love can't always hold things together. Those closest to Bilyaminu began to notice changes in him. He smiled less, laughed less. He withdrew from certain social gatherings, making excuses when friends invited him out. It was subtle at first, easy to overlook, but the weight on his shoulders became more visible over time. Then there were the calls, late-night conversations with friends where he sounded tired, distracted. He never said too much, never outright admitted there was a problem, but there were pauses, moments where he seemed to be choosing his words carefully, as if he wanted to say more but couldn't. And then there was the phone. Bilyaminu by nature was a private person, but he had nothing to hide. He wasn't reckless, didn't engage in scandals. But in the days leading up to that fatal night, something shifted. He became more guarded with his phone, careful about where he left it. Those around him didn't know why, and perhaps neither did he. Maybe it was instinct, a gut feeling that something was unraveling. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that a single moment, a single discovery would change everything. And when that moment arrived, it wasn't a heated argument or a public confrontation, it was something far more intimate. It was Miriam finding something in his phone, something that made her blood run cold. What she saw, what it meant to her, and the storm it unleashed. Those are the details that would turn a troubled marriage into a crime that would shock the nation. And by the time the night was over, Bilyaminu Bello, the man who had once been full of promise, the devoted father, the friend who always put others before himself, would be lying in a pool of his own blood. And the world he had built would come crashing down. Bilyaminu had always been a man who sought solutions, not escape. He believed that problems, no matter how heated, could be resolved with patience and understanding, but what he didn't know was that some storms weren't meant to be weathered, some were meant to destroy. The tension between him and Miriam had been simmering for months. It wasn't just the usual marital disputes, not just the weight of expectations from their families or the responsibilities that came with their name. This was something deeper, something far more volatile. Their love, once promising, had twisted into something unrecognizable, something that felt like a battlefield rather than a home. Miriam was not the type to suffer in silence. When she was hurt, she made it known, and in the days leading up to November 18, 2017, something had shifted in her. Those close to her saw the change. Her words were sharper, her patience thinner. She moved like a woman on the edge, one who had convinced herself of a betrayal so great it overshadowed everything else. It started with the phone. Bilyaminu had always been private with his device, but not secretive. He wasn't reckless, didn't flaunt anything that could cause trouble, but Miriam had grown suspicious. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe it was something else, something fueled by old wounds and insecurities that had festered over time. Whatever it was, it led her to his phone that night. What she found broke something inside her. There were messages, words exchanged between Bilyaminu and another woman. Maybe they were flirtatious, maybe they weren't, but to Miriam they were undeniable proof of betrayal, proof that she was right to feel the way she did, proof that the man she had once trusted had been hiding something from her. The rage was instant. She confronted him, her voice slicing through the stillness of their home. Bilyaminu, caught off guard, tried to explain, to defend himself, but it was already too late. The accusations flew like daggers, each one hitting its mark. Miriam wasn't just angry. She was furious, betrayed, humiliated. She wanted answers, and she wanted them now. The argument escalated fast. It wasn't just words anymore, it was threats, ultimatums. Miriam demanded a divorce, her voice shaking with rage. She didn't just want to leave, she wanted to hurt him, to make him feel the depth of the pain she felt. Bilyaminu, ever the calm one, tried to de-escalate. He told her she was overreacting, that things weren't as they seemed, but Miriam wasn't listening. She was past reasoning, past rational thought. And then she snapped. She grabbed the first thing within reach, a broken bottle. The sharp edges glinted under the dim light, a physical manifestation of the anger that coursed through her. For a moment, the room held its breath. Bilyaminu froze. He had seen her angry before, but never like this. Never with this kind of fury, this kind of intent. It was at that moment that Ibrahim Aliero, Bilyaminu's close friend, intervened. Ibrahim had been there that night, watching as things spiraled out of control. He had known them both for years, had witnessed their love story unfold, had seen the cracks form long before anyone else did. And now he saw what those cracks had turned into. A situation that was rapidly slipping beyond repair. He stepped between them, his voice firm yet calm. He told Miriam to put the bottle down, to take a breath, to think. He turned to Bilyaminu, urging him to leave, to step away before things got worse. But Bilyaminu hesitated. This was his home, his wife, his life. Walking away felt like giving up, like admitting defeat. He had never been the kind of man to abandon a fight, not when it mattered. Ibrahim tried again, his voice more urgent this time. Just leave for the night. Let things cool off. But Bilyaminu shook his head. He stayed. And that decision changed everything. Ibrahim could only watch as his friend made his choice, the weight of it settling in the air between them. Bilyaminu had always been a man of reason, a man who believed in resolutions, not in walking away. But some storms weren't meant to be weathered, and as he stepped back inside that house, the air thick with unspoken words and unfinished arguments, the night took on a silence that felt more like a warning than a moment of peace. The argument had died down, or at least it seemed to. Miriam had retreated into herself, the fire in her eyes momentarily dimmed. But rage doesn't always explode. It lingers, waiting for the right moment to reignite, and in the hours that followed, the embers of her anger smoldered beneath the surface. Bilyaminu, exhausted, had left with Ibrahim, needing air, needing space. It wasn't an escape, it was a pause. They drove in silence, the weight of the night pressing down on them. At the pharmacy, Bilyaminu reached for antiseptics, bandages. The bite on his hand throbbed, a deep imprint of Miriam's fury. He winced as he dabbed at it, but his mind was elsewhere. Even after all that had happened, he was still thinking of her. At the ATM, he withdrew cash, not for himself, but for her. Miriam's car had been damaged in the chaos of their fights, and even now, as his body bore the wounds of their battle, he was trying to make things right. It wasn't love in the way most people understood it. It was duty, responsibility, a need to fix what had been broken, even when it seemed impossible. He stood outside the car for a long moment, the city lights casting long shadows across the pavement. He told Ibrahim he wasn't sure if he should go back. He knew Miriam. He knew the rage that burned in her, how it came in waves, unpredictable and consuming. But he also knew that this was his home. And so, despite everything, he walked back inside. The house was silent, too silent. Miriam was waiting. There was no telling what words were exchanged in those final hours, what was said to reignite the fire. Maybe it was the tension that had never really disappeared, the ghosts of the night still lingering between them. Maybe it was the unspoken truth that neither of them had the strength to acknowledge, that their love had curdled into something toxic, something neither of them could walk away from without destruction. What is known is that it happened fast. The argument erupted again, sharp, cutting, voices rose, words twisted into weapons. The accusations were worse this time, the resentment spilling over, unchecked. Bilyaminu tried to diffuse it, tried to hold on to the last threads of reason, but Mariaminu was already past the point of listening. And then came the violence. A struggle. The room became a battlefield, a flurry of movement, of shouts, of rage manifesting into something tangible. She struck first, a slap, then another. Bilyaminu stepped back, his patience fraying. He told her to stop. She didn't. The next moments were chaos. A blur of motion, the glint of something sharp catching the dim light, a knife. The first wound tore through his shoulder, the pain searing, sudden. He stumbled back, stunned. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This was something else entirely. His instinct should have been to run, to fight back, but he didn't. Another strike, his chest this time, his breath hitched, his knees weakening. He tried to push her away, tried to reach for her hands, but she was relentless. The rage had taken full control, guiding her movements with terrifying precision. A third, his thigh. The room spun. He gasped, his body giving in to the wounds, the blood pooling too quickly. He staggered, trying to make sense of it, trying to process the betrayal, the pain, the horror of what was happening. She had bitten him again, this time deeper, tearing through flesh, drawing blood with a force that was no longer human, no longer sane. It was primal, a final act of possession, of destruction. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The anger drained from Miriam's face as reality set in. The man before her, the man she had spent years loving, fighting, resenting, was slipping away. The weight of what she had done pressed down on her chest, suffocating. Bilyaminu collapsed, The room once filled with screams and chaos was now thick with silence, save for the ragged sound of his breathing, shallow, fading. Miriam dropped the weapon. Her hands trembled. There was blood everywhere, on her, on him, on the walls. She moved to him, panic setting in. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. This wasn't what she had wanted. She called for help, but it was too late. The silence after the chaos was unbearable. Miriam stood over Bilyaminu's lifeless body, her hands trembling, her breath uneven. The room was in disarray, blood smeared across the floor, the knife lying nearby, the air still thick with the echoes of their final fight. Reality had set in too late. He wasn't moving. His eyes, once filled with warmth and reason, were now frozen in time. The weight of what she had done crashed over her like a tidal wave, drowning her in a panic she had never known before. Her mind raced. What had she done? How had it come to this? Just hours ago he had left the house, injured but alive. He had come back, still willing to make peace. And now, he was gone. The realization sent her spiraling. She dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against his wounds as if she could will life back into him. But his body was growing cold, his blood pooling beneath him. Miriam scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering. She needed help. Someone had to fix this. Someone had to make this nightmare go away. She grabbed her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed the first number that came to mind, her mother. The call was frantic, incoherent. Her mother couldn't understand at first, but the terror in Miriam's voice told her everything she needed to know. She wasted no time. Family members were alerted, calls were made. Within minutes, the house was no longer quiet. It was filled with hushed voices, hurried footsteps, and the overwhelming scent of blood and fear. Someone, one of the family members, maybe an uncle or a cousin, suggested taking him to the hospital. Maybe, just maybe, there was still time. They lifted Bilyaminu's body, his weight heavy in their arms, and rushed him outside. But deep down they already knew. He was gone before they even got him into the car. His body was lifeless, unresponsive. There was no saving him. And yet they drove. The hospital was their only hope, no matter how slim, but when they arrived, their worst fears were confirmed. The doctors took one look, and the answer was clear. There was nothing they could do. Bilyaminu had succumbed to his injuries long before help had arrived. The reality of his death sent another wave of shock through the family. Miriam was inconsolable, but her tears did little to change the facts. A man had died, and now there were questions that needed answers. When the authorities got involved, the gravity of the situation deepened. The police wasted no time launching an investigation. The scene at the house was examined, the blood, the knife, the signs of struggle. It all painted a picture that Miriam couldn't explain away. But she tried. Her story shifted. When the officers questioned her, she claimed it had been an accident. She insisted that they had fought. Yes, but she hadn't meant to kill him. She told them he had fallen onto a broken shisha pot, the glass piercing him fatally. She wept as she spoke, her hands still stained with his blood, her voice cracking under the weight of her own words. But the officers weren't convinced. The wounds told a different story. A shisha pot couldn't have done this. The deep, precise stab wounds were too deliberate. They showed force, intent, and then there were the other injuries. The bites, the bruises, the sheer brutality of it all. This wasn't an accident. It was something much darker. Witness statements only made things worse for Miriam. The neighbors had heard the shouting, the arguments that had gone on for hours. Some had heard the fights before, knew this wasn't new. Bilyaminu's friends, especially Ibrahim, told the police about the tension in the marriage, the way things had escalated. The bite marks on Bilyaminu's body, the history of violence, it all painted a grim picture. Miriam's arrest was swift. The officers didn't hesitate. They cuffed her, led her out of the house that had once been her home but was now a crime scene. The reality of it hit her in waves. She wasn't just losing her husband. She was losing everything. The media wasted no time in picking up the story. News of Bilyaminu's death spread quickly, and with it, speculation. Who was Miriam Sanda really? A grieving wife or a woman with a violent temper? The public wanted answers, and they wanted justice. As she sat in the holding cell, reality pressed down on her like a crushing weight. The walls felt too close, the air too thick. Just days ago, she had been living her life, surrounded by privilege, by wealth, by the illusion of control. Now she was nothing more than an accused murderer. a woman whose life had unraveled in the most brutal way possible. Her family scrambled for solutions. They hired lawyers, worked every connection they had to mitigate the damage. But the evidence was damning, and the court of public opinion had already made up its mind. The whispers grew louder. This wasn't just a crime of passion, it was a story of power, of control, of a woman who had everything yet still found herself consumed by jealousy and rage. Some saw her as a victim of a toxic marriage, while others saw her as a cold-blooded killer. And as the days passed, the reality of what lay ahead became clear. There would be no easy way out. The trial was coming. The truth, or at least the version the courts believed, would soon be laid bare for the world to see. The trial of Mariam Sanda was one of the most highly publicized cases in Nigeria's recent history. As the days turned into months and months into years, the weight of what had transpired on that fateful night bore down on the nation. The courtroom became a battleground not just for legal arguments, but for public opinion. Was this a case of cold-blooded murder, or had Mariam acted in the heat of passion? From the very first hearing, it was clear that the prosecution was determined to seek justice for Bilyaminu. Led by Justice Yusuf Halalu, the judge who would eventually deliver the verdict, and with the prosecution spearheaded by Hassan Tahir, the state was unwavering in its pursuit of the death penalty. Every piece of evidence was scrutinized, every detail of the crime scene, every mark on Bilyaminu's body, every statement given by witnesses in the days that followed his death. The prosecution painted a damning picture. They argued that Mariam had a history of violence, that her marriage to Bilyaminu had been riddled with fights, jealousy, and suspicion. They emphasized that this was not an accident nor an impulsive act. The depth of the stab wounds, the force with which they were inflicted, these were not the actions of a woman merely trying to defend herself. They were the actions of someone who had lost all control. Mariam's defense, on the other hand, fought desperately to reshape the narrative. Her lawyers claimed that she had been provoked, that the marriage had been abusive, that she had never intended to kill her husband. They pointed out that she had called for help, that she had tried to get him to the hospital. But these arguments failed to hold weight against the forensic evidence and the testimonies that contradicted her story. The court listened to hours of testimonies from forensic experts, medical professionals, and those who had witnessed the couple's tumultuous relationship. The autopsy reports confirmed what many had suspected from the beginning. Bilyaminu had not simply fallen onto a shisha pot. His injuries were the result of deliberate, forceful stabbing. The deep wounds were proof of intent, of rage, of something far beyond self-defense. As the trial dragged on, the tension in the courtroom became palpable. Each hearing brought new developments, new revelations. Family members from both sides sat in silent agony, forced to relive the night over and over again through witness accounts and evidence presentations. The public followed every twist and turn, debating the case across social media, in markets, in homes, in offices. Everyone had an opinion. Some saw Mariam as a woman trapped in a toxic marriage, others saw her as a murderer who had taken the life of a man who had once loved her. And then, after over 2 years of legal battles, the final day arrived. On January 27, 2020, the High Court of the Federal Capital Territory was packed to the brim. The air inside the courtroom was heavy with anticipation. The world outside seemed to hold its breath as the judge, Justice Yusuf Halalu, took his seat and prepared to deliver the final verdict. There was no room for doubt. The evidence was undeniable. Mariam Sanda was found guilty of killing her husband Bilyaminu Bello. The room exploded in a storm of emotions. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mariam's face drained of color, her body trembling as the words settled in. And then, as the judge continued, everything came crashing down. She was sentenced to death by hanging. A wail pierced the air. Mariam broke down in front of the court, her cries echoing through the walls. She clung to her mother, begging for mercy, for another chance, for someone, anyone, to intervene. Her mother, who had been a pillar of support throughout the trial, fell to her knees, pleading, sobbing, grasping for any hope, but there was none. The judge's decision was final. Outside the courthouse, the news spread like wildfire. The nation was divided. Some believed justice had been served, others believed it was too harsh, but regardless of opinion, one thing was clear: the case had come to a dramatic and irreversible end. In the weeks that followed, appeals were filed. Miriam's legal team fought to overturn the ruling to secure a lesser sentence. They argued that the trial had been unfair, that the circumstances of the crime had not been fully considered, but in the eyes of the court, the case was airtight. Justice had been delivered. And so Miriam Sanda, a woman once known for her beauty, her status, and her place in the elite circles of Abuja, sat in a prison cell, awaiting her fate. Her days of privilege were long gone. The walls of her cell were now her only reality, the memories of that night forever haunting her. Bilyaminu Bello's family, though grieving, finally had closure. Their son, brother, friend, his life had been taken in the most brutal way possible. And while no verdict could bring him back, the sentence served as a statement. Justice would not be denied. This case will forever remain one of Nigeria's most unforgettable crime stories, a chilling reminder that in moments of rage, the course of life can be altered forever. Now let me ask you, what do you think about this case? Do you believe justice was truly served? Let us know in the comments below, and if you believe that no one deserves to die at the hands of their loved one, subscribe to this channel. Only those who believe that murder is justifiable would ignore this.